Okay, so does anybody remember last time? I know it's been a long time, but I think it's been like a year now.
Last year.
It really feels like it was a long time. But we'll just do a quick little recap here, and then we'll get into 6 through 11. So the big takeaway in chapter 1, well, first off, anytime you're looking at Paul's writings, the other apostle said that his words are hard to understand, and that the people that are ignorant and unstable pervert and twist it to their own destruction. So anytime we're reading any of Paul's writings, the other apostles thought that Paul was kind of hard to understand at the time. And the people who are ignorant and unstable, they pervert his writings. They twist his writings to say stuff that they don't actually say, and it's to their own destruction that they do that. So if it's tough for the other apostles to sort of understand what Paul was actually getting at, then us being 2,000 years removed from when Paul was with the other apostles, being 2,000 years later, it's going to be tough for us to understand it too. And I've heard Romans explained and taught on for a lot of years, and my views about Romans and then Galatians and then some of his other writings, the understanding of those writings have evolved too, just simply because I guess I've grown, which is the point. But we're not supposed to run after lawlessness, but if we get involved in legalism, that can be a trap too. So we're supposed to grow in grace and in the knowledge of God. That's good. That's fine. So this is chapter 1. Paul defines grace, right? So when I was growing up in the church, I had an understanding of grace that was sort of prevalent, like in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, what it actually is, or what the church was saying that grace was at the time. And of course, there's varying degrees of what the church was saying at that time, because there's different denominations, different perspectives. But if we let Paul define it, Paul says that grace is actually the gift of being considered righteous in God's sight because we see Yeshua for who and what he is. Like, that's actually the definition of grace, is that if we see Yeshua for who he is, then God considers us righteous. You know, it actually has nothing to do with sort of the prevalent definition that was taught by the church in the past 20, 30 years to a large degree. So as we go on here, Paul says in chapter 1 that he's the redeemer and atonement needed for our inability to walk with God. We have a systemic problem, which is that we have the knowledge of good and evil at the same time. And while that is the case, we have a difficult time apart from God choosing good, and our heart in our former state tends to gravitate towards evil, which is very unfortunate. But this is the same concept found in Torah, actually, because instead of the blood of bulls and goats that provides atonement, we trust in the atonement and the redemption found in the sacrifice of the Lamb of God, which is Yeshua or Jesus, however you want to refer to it. Because even though the offerings were brought to the altar, it was a solution to the problem, wherever it was that we messed up. At the end of the day, you still had to trust in the innocent blood to atone for what area it was that we messed up in. So there was still a lot of faith involved, even in the temple times. Oh, are we going to do this? There we go. So it's still in chapter 1. The goal is to walk in the Spirit. If we do that, it is like there is no law. So Has anybody ever even heard that? Has anybody heard that ever? Yeah, it's unfortunate. I hadn't either. I hadn't either. Because if you think about it, I don't want to get too far ahead here because we'll cover most of this, but if we focus on Yeshua and the relationship that we're supposed to cultivate, um, then he actually replaces our old nature, which is our sin nature, with the new nature that is installed when the Holy Spirit comes, when the Helper comes. Because the Helper is the one that is supposed to help us in our inability to keep commands, to keep God's ways. So how can we tell if we're doing this right? If we're slow to anger, patient, gentle, kind, at peace, then that is the easiest way to figure out if the relationship is healthy behind the scenes. If the relationship is healthy, then walking in the Spirit is the product that gets produced. So, like for me, I can tell you when I stay out of the Word, like when I'm not in the Word, like I should be, and I'm not spending my time in there like I should, then my life gets more difficult. It just gets more difficult because my behavior is not great. And so instead of the fruit of the Spirit being produced, my old man starts to reemerge. But if I'm doing what a relationship requires, spending time with him, then all of these different fruits sort of start to come to the forefront. And it's based on a relationship, right? So the relationship is actually what produces the good fruit, which leads to good works. A lot of people, they will, and myself included, because when we mess up, our tendency is to hide from God. We want to like run and get away from the situation. It's just like it was in the garden. And then you kind of get to the place where it's like, okay, I'm going to do it better next time. I'm going to try harder next time. And it's been my experience that really didn't work, and so the solution is not to try harder. Maybe your mileage varies a little bit, but I know it's definitely not the case with me. If I try harder, then I'm actually trying to do it on my own strength, and then it's ineffective. So the relationship piece, exposing ourselves to his word and practicing prayer, that is what actually gets to the relationship piece. And then as a result of that, his nature begins to displace ours. So we've all heard, if we love him, we will keep his commandments. Sometimes, though, we can have a tendency to say, well, I'm going to keep the commandments, and then that will prove that I love him. Right? Has anybody ever been guilty of that? Like you just try really hard to keep the commandments, and then, or even the ways of God, like the way that he thinks, right? And we try to do that because that's our natural inclination. It says right here that this is what we should or shouldn't do. So I'm going to try really hard to do that. And then that will kind of like prove that I love him. But that doesn't work. It hasn't worked. It didn't work for me. It didn't work for me. And so we kind of get this out of whack a little bit. And I really think that the body, even the broader body, but especially the Torah observant fellowships, we can really struggle with this from time to time, especially at first, right? You grow up in church, you're not really well versed in Torah at all, and then so you immerse yourself in Torah, and then you're like, I'm reading and it says right here, this is what I should do, and then this is what I shouldn't do. And so that's what I'm going to do or not do, right? But And then it's in an effort to like try to prove within ourselves that we love him. But it doesn't, it's been my experience that it doesn't work well if we approach it from that angle. So if we love him, we will pursue him. If we pursue him, we will find him. And when we find him, he will exchange our old nature for his. So as a result, we will keep the commands because we first loved him, right? Because we loved him first, then we keep the commands. So it's the love piece is actually the beginning, and that causes the relationship to be fruitful, and then as a result of the relationship being fruitful, then our behavior begins to align with his.
We were kind of talking about this with the kids, trying to read Matthew together with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't even remember which passage we were talking about, but it came up. We ended up talking about just like a marriage relationship.
Yep.
And in my brain, I kind of have to go back to that because I tend to be more like,
Yeah.
this is what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
I have to follow these steps to whatever. But obviously, you don't do that in a marriage relationship. I keep the vows that I took to Chase because I love him.
Yep.
And it's easy to do that just because, like, my heart's in that. And
For
so
sure.
you can put that, transpose that onto the relationship with the Lord. And there's so much. I mean, marriage is all throughout the scripture once you guys are into it.
It's the model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really beautiful.
It is. We're going to get to that too. No, you're good. No, but there were. It's funny you're talking about it because it's one of the things that we're going to cover pretty good. Okay. So here we go. Right. Well, we're going to get there, but this is another piece. But so when we try to obey the commandments in our own strength, what we end up doing is whether we realize it or not, we're trying to work ourselves into a closer relationship with him, right? And we probably don't realize. I know I didn't realize it for a long time that that's what I was doing, but I actually was. But so, anyways, we establish the relationship, and then the outcome is works because of his nature that he gives us, right? So we spend time cultivating this relationship. His nature gradually replaces ours. It's not all at once. It's incremental in my experience. So in this example, he's the tree where the branches and the fruit that is produced is the fruit of the Spirit. And because of the relationship between the tree and the branches, and they are one, they're echad, right? So the branches that are cut off because of no relationship cannot produce fruit. We see this we see this all throughout the new writings, especially when Yeshua is drawing the comparison between the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and then his disciples. There's a bunch of that comparative language in there. And we can do that. We can try to keep Torah in our own strength, but I've done it, and I can tell you that it just doesn't work. So really what we're getting at here is a change of heart or a circumcised heart versus this white-knuckled religious observance. Contrary to popular belief, but the aim of Torah was not about perfect performance. The aim of Torah was to cause us to trust in the innocent blood required for atonement. And everybody falls short, all of us. Okay, so chapter 2. This is when a society does not give God the glory that he deserves, he gives them over to degrading passions that are unnatural. I would make the case that we see a lot of that today. It's not a new thing. It's been around since the beginning of time. If a society pretends that God isn't responsible for creation, or if a society manufactures new ways of worshiping God other than what he prescribed, he will give them over to passions and relationships that are unnatural in nature. So, PG version. Moral corruption, lifestyle of depravity. So the Torah, it was designed to make everyone aware of their sinful nature that is embedded within. You could be the most righteous person in Israel according to the law, but still had to trust in the atonement. That's what we were talking about at first, right? So You mess up, you bring your gift to the altar, but at the end of the day, you still have to trust that that innocent blood will cover, right? Think about Day of Atonement, right? You had sacrifice for the people, and then also for the priests. So what does that tell you? Well, the priests weren't perfect either, and so at some point they had to trust too. They had to trust in the innocent blood for that was on their behalf. So this model has been around in Torah forever. It's just maybe it hasn't been maybe explained so well, you know. Since we've all fallen short, God has revealed his righteousness and his way of making people righteous using the model of Torah. So this is where grace enters into the fray again. So in the same way that our forefathers trusted in the blood to atone for their sins, so do we. And when we trust in Yeshua, God considers us righteous, which is the definition of grace. Forefathers meaning in the temple era especially, because they had this model. You okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Good? Okay. So the whole thing is about trusting God to help us deal with our mishandling of the knowledge of good and evil. If you think back to the creation story, Genesis, early on in Genesis, the problem is that we ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now we have both the knowledge of good and evil, and our natural inclination is to gravitate towards evil or wickedness. And so that's really what the whole thing is all about. It's just taken a lot of years of expansion on that narrative to kind of get us to the place where there's a solution for that problem. There was a solution for the problem in the temple days too, but it still involved the trusting of innocent blood for the priest and also for the people, the nation of Israel. All right, so into Romans chapter 3, Paul explains that the relationship that Abraham had with God originally was the goal. It's this covenantal relationship Abraham had with him that was based on trust, and it was 400 plus years before the law was officially administered to Israel. So that brings up some interesting points. So is the Torah bad? Paul's like, heck no, it's not bad. It's really good. But my problem is that I can't do it all the time. So we wouldn't even be able to know what sin was without Torah, right? We don't even know what it is. That's one of the primary purposes for it to be administered to Israel, is so that God could prove that we are sinners by nature, because we all fall short. If there was a possibility that we wouldn't fall short, then the offerings and the Day of Atonement wouldn't even be a thing. It wouldn't even be needed. But our problem is that it is needed. So if you think about it, if the covenant was extended to the Gentiles also, which was God's plan all along, then it couldn't be confined just to the people that had Torah only. It couldn't. So if you think about how Abraham figures into this, that we know of, he might have had some foundational understandings of what Torah would later become, but he didn't have the whole of Torah to look at. So there was a lot of trust involved with Abraham in the beginning of that covenant. And that model is all throughout even the temple times, and especially for us today too, still based on trust. And this covenant that was cut with Abraham, it was before he was circumcised, right? So it was while he was circumcised that this took place. Then later it would be for the circumcised, but also for the uncircumcised, not physically. I mean, it was physically for Abraham, but allegorically it's talking about whether our heart is uncircumcised or not. Okay, so we'll look at this real quick. It's kind of neat if you go back and look at it, the covenant that he had with Abraham. So he required these things from Abraham for the covenant. So you had to have a heifer. In Numbers 19, it says that it's symbolic of purification from sin. So it's one of the sin offerings. The female goat, which in Numbers 15, it says that is for unintentional sin. Then you have the ram in Numbers and Leviticus, and it can be a guilt offering, peace offering, or sin offering. But it also has to do with the ordination of priests, which is the ram of ordination. Then you have the turtle dove, which is in Leviticus 12, along with the young pigeon. And those were sin offerings for your son or your daughter, right? So when this covenant was originally cut with Abraham, it literally covered everyone. So it's very interesting because I'll just read this. We'll get through it here, but it says, I wrote the cleansing of sin, unintentional sin, guilt offering, peace offering, and sin offering for adults and children, and the commissioning of the priesthood. So in the mind of God, the covenant that he made with Abraham and his future children had to be ratified with innocent blood also. So this is before temple times. Abraham's children were in Egypt for roughly 400 years until they came out, and then the law was administered, followed by another 1,500 years until the crucifixion of Jesus. And Paul is basically saying in Romans here that we are sons of Abraham if we trust God like Abraham did. And that means we've come out of Egypt. We've been shown our sin. We know what sin is now because of the illumination of the law. We don't know what sin is without the law. So now that we do, and then our ancestors trusted in innocent blood for atonement. Their innocent blood came from bulls and goats. Ours comes from Yeshua himself. But if you notice, that God and not Abraham literally declared symbolically in advance that Abraham's children would be clean. And you see that in the representation of the turtle dove and the pigeon. So he was communicating through this interaction with Abraham that the relationship is built on trust, but also for atonement for sin. And if you think back to the garden, sin is really the product of mistrust, because when the serpent came to Eve and Adam, the first thing that he alluded to was, did God really say this or that? Is that really what he said? Gets the mind going. As a result of us, our ancestors not handling that situation right, now we've got the knowledge of good and evil, and we have a tendency to mishandle that, right? Because the natural inclination is for, you can be a good person, but still the natural inclination of man is towards evil without some help. Okay, does that mean that the law is done away with? No. Paul's saying it's not. People try to say that that's what he says, but that's not what he's saying. Has heaven and earth passed away? Because, Yeshua said not one jot or tittle will pass away unless heaven and earth passes away. But the goal is to have us walk with him in trust and righteousness, just like Abraham. But we have a systemic malfunction, which is a sin nature. And the only way out is this renewal of the marriage covenant and to be faithful in the marriage, which is doing what a successful marriage requires. So when we engage in this relationship, his nature replaces ours, fruit is produced. And we will walk in the Spirit, which is the fruit. That's the outcome. And then it's like there's no laws to break, because that new nature isn't a criminal by nature. Laws are written for criminals. They're not written for people that are full of good works. So chapter 5, we're considered righteous in God's sight when we trust in the atonement of Yeshua. That's what the definition of grace is. That's what Paul says the definition of grace is. So through Adam, sin entered the world. Then through Yeshua, the righteousness that comes from God alone entered the world. So everyone that trusts in the atonement of Yeshua, just like our fathers trusted in the innocent blood to atone in the temple times, they are considered righteous and receive the new nature, which is the helper, the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost. If we continue to walk in this new nature and put our focus on the relationship that we have with him, then the relationship produces fruit, and then his nature overtakes ours, and we end up keeping the commands, not in our own strength, but in his, because that new nature doesn't come from us, it comes from him. This is the piece that you were talking about. So when two people love each other, right, they enter into this marriage covenant. And there is fruit that is produced from this relationship, which is children, right? That's the fruit of the two people coming together, PG version. Well, maybe not so PG, but I'm sorry, it's not. I'll move on. Yeah, we'll keep going. So the two people came together, and there was this new creation, this new child that came from the relationship being in a good place, right? So you have the man and the woman, the child is produced, and this is the new creation is a byproduct of intimacy between the wife and the bridegroom. So if we use that sort of like Dana was talking about earlier, um, our job is to make sure that the marriage covenant is in good shape. If we do that, he's going to be faithful. But if we're faithful, then this new creation that gets produced is not the child, but it's this new nature that comes forth as a result of this marriage covenant being in good shape. Okay, so now we're into Romans 6. So if you guys want to turn there, I'm gonna have it up here to read if you guys want to do that. But I've got some notes too. We'll kind of go through it here, but I'm going to try to keep this a little bit shorter than normal because 2 hours is a lot. 2.5 hours is a lot. We're going to try to keep it to like an hour, which probably means an hour and a half, but just we're going to try to get through 11. That's what we're going to try to do. Okay, so Romans chapter 6, it says, "What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Far be it. For if we are persons that have died to sin, how can we live again in it? Or do you not know that we who are baptized into Yeshua Messiah are baptized into his death? For we are buried with him in baptism unto death, that as Jesus arose from the dead into the glory of the Father, so also we should walk in a new life. For if we have been planted together with him into the likeness of his death, that the body of sin might be abolished, and we be no more servants to sin. For he that is dead to it is emancipated from sin." So this is the Syriac version. You guys are probably going to be reading out of a different version, but it's going to be all the same. Okay, so when we talk about baptism, I think we've mentioned this before. I can't remember when, but we just think it's all about going into the water and then coming up a new person. But really, what that word is talking about in the Greek is a piece of cloth being immersed in a dye. And so this cloth takes on the qualities of the dye that it's being dipped in. So it really means to be immersed in Messiah. So like, yes, symbolically, you go under the water, you come back up a new creation, but this immersion process, our job is to immerse ourselves in Messiah. So there's what happens, if it's at the hand of a priest or a pastor or a good friend or something that you want to be baptized. There's the physical act of doing it, but the thing that lurks behind the scenes, the sort of spiritual ramifications, is that after that happens, we should be immersed in Messiah. We should be seeking to learn everything that we can learn about him. And that's what the word disciple actually means. It means pupil. So when Paul says that we should walk in this new life, it can also mean newness of spirit, right? So we have this new nature that we're supposed to lock arms with. And okay, in John 6, it says that it is the spirit who gives life. The flesh profits nothing. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and they are life. So it's just, again, another allusion to this newness of life that we're supposed to walk in. So when it says, so like some of the translations out there may say that that you should render yourself dead to sin, but I think this is a really good definition, a good choice from the translators there when it says to be emancipated from sin. Because when you're emancipated for something, it literally means that you have been declared innocent or to be made righteous, right? I think that's a better choice there. So continuing here, if then we are dead with Messiah, let us believe that we shall live with the same Messiah. For we know that Messiah rose from the dead and dies no more. Death has no dominion over him. For in dying he died for sin once, and in living he lives unto God. So also do you account yourselves as being dead to sin and alive to God through our Lord Jesus Messiah. Therefore, do not let sin reign in your body so that you obey its lusts, and also give not your members as instruments of evil unto sin, but give yourselves up to God as those who have been resurrected from the dead, and let your members be instruments for the righteousness of God. And sin shall have no dominion over you. Sin should no longer dominate you, is really probably the better wording there. For you are not under the law, but under grace. So, I know. And there's 1,000 different directions we could have went with this, but this is just, we're gonna go through this, and this has been butchered so badly, really. And yeah, right, he does. Yeah. But I did want to kind of include a few things there. So when you look up this word under, what it means is to be in subjection to be controlled by, or to be mastered by. And I like the to be mastered by probably the best, because, well, we'll get to it here, but I like the to be mastered by probably the best, because if you think back to Galatians, where he's saying that the Torah was to be a tutor or a schoolmaster, right? It's not that you discard the tutor or the schoolmaster. I mean, you still give them their place of honor for sure, but the pecking order has changed, right? So what used to be, I don't want to go too far down this road, but we will, but not right now. So grace, according to Paul, it's the gift of being considered righteous in God's sight. And we acquire that by seeing Yeshua for who he is, right? So people make the mistake here, and they think that they got to choose one or the other. Okay, well, then it says we're not under law, we're under grace. So if we're under grace, then the law no longer applies, right? The law has been done away with. Grace has superseded the whole ball of wax, which in a way it has, because instead of us doing good works and that producing righteousness, we know we're going to fall short. And so it still requires an offering. It still requires innocent blood on our behalf. Whereas the grace that Paul is talking about is that if we see Yeshua for who he is, then God sees us as being righteous, right? So we're not working ourselves to a place of righteousness. And if you think about it, the law was not written for criminals, but it was written. The law was written for criminals and not for the righteous. You can read some of this in 1 Timothy. And if you think about it, there would absolutely be no reason for laws if it weren't for criminal behavior, right? I say this all the time at work because we're on the road a lot. We're always on this conference call, and it's like, I can't believe this is happening, or I can't believe this driver did this, or I can't believe this person did that. And I always say the same thing. I'm like, yeah, they should make laws against that. Of course, they know now that I'm kind of jacking around with them, but at first they're like, there literally are laws for that. And I'm like, I know, that's the point. Right? Because, but anyways, so this is the big piece here, is that God no longer sees us as criminals if we see Yeshua for who he is. I know that is sort of counterintuitive, not counterintuitive, but a lot of people, they don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about that, actually. But that's the overarching theme of the bulk of Paul's writings, is that when we see Yeshua for who he is, then God no longer sees us as a criminal. Because if you think about the purpose of the law and the temple thematically, but also all the examples that we have in all of the models, the whole purpose was to reveal Messiah. Okay, so if you see Messiah, then God considers you as righteous in his sight. because you accept what the purpose of the law was for, which was to reveal Messiah. It was also to reveal that we were criminals by nature, but since we trusted in the blood of the atonement in Yeshua, then we've been given this new nature. That's what gives us access to the new nature, right? And there are no laws written against good behavior, right? Which the new nature naturally produces. So if you think about like your kids, if they're acting good, you don't have to tell them anything, right? You literally don't have to tell them a word because it's like, hey man, they're doing what they're supposed to do. We're all good here. But if they start not doing what they're supposed to do, then there's judgment associated with that, right? Or at least chastisement, because it's like, no, you're not supposed to be doing this. I don't know how many times I've told you not to do this, but you're doing it, and we have to talk about this, and it may be inconvenient to talk about this right now, but we're going to talk about it, because if I don't do it now, I'm going to forget later, right? When I was growing up, man, it was commonplace to see like kids at dinner time just being picked up and just smashed, right while everybody's eating dinner. It's a good thing. What? Yeah. So what? I was one of those kids, yeah, from time to time. But so if we think about it, laws aren't where righteousness exists. There's no need for law.
I heard Zach Bauer explain that one time pretty well, talking about like just what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, people that are driving or whatever. Like, you get pulled over, you're given a ticket because you were breaking the law. That means that you are now under the law.
That's right.
Because you've been judgment, a form of judgment.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. So people get this kind of squirrely because they think that they've got to choose one or the other, right? They think that they've got to be Jewish and choose the laws of God, or they think that they have to be a Western post-Reformation Christian, and we're only going to think about grace. Their definition of grace, though, is that you can pretty much do what you want to as long as you say you're sorry for it, right? I mean, that's kind of like the post-Reformation definition of grace. It's definitely not the biblical definition of grace. I'm not saying that everybody views it that way, but there's a lot of people that do view it that way. So is the law done away with? Absolutely not. Is the law bad? Absolutely not, right? I mean, since when did it become lawful for us to murder, to steal from our neighbors, to go grab our neighbor's wife and, have a good time, whatever? The difference is that now we obey the law through the nature naturally if we walk in the Spirit, right? So how do we do that? Well, you have the wife and the husband. They come together. They have this covenant together, and then there's something new that's produced, which is the new nature, the new creation. So that's actually how that process works. But if we abandon the marriage, then walking in the Spirit becomes impossible. It literally becomes impossible, in my experience. Okay. So we'll continue here. It says, what then? Shall we sin because we are not under the law, but under grace? Far be it. Know you not that to whomsoever you give yourselves up to serve in bondage, his servants you are, whom you serve, whether it be to sin or whether it be to righteousness, that you give ear. And you guys are free to comment whenever you want. So this is like open air here. But thanks be to God that you were once the servants of sin, but have now from the heart obeyed that form of doctrine to which you are devoted. And when you are emancipated from sin, or to be made free from, you have become servants to righteousness. So I speak as among men because of the infirmity of your flesh. As you once gave up your members to the servitude of pollution and iniquity, so now also give your members up to the servitude of righteousness and sanctity. For when you were the servants of sin, you were emancipated from righteousness. And what harvest did you have then in that of which you are now ashamed? For the result thereof is death. And now as you have been emancipated from sin and have become servants to God, your fruits are holy, and the result thereof is everlasting life. For the wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is life eternal through Yeshua our Messiah. So again there, to cause to be righteous, to be made righteous, to render as righteousness, or to render as righteous. So what's that word emancipated means. So we kind of lose this, but the context of chapter 7 is still chapter 6. There's no paragraphs in the original text. So Paul is still talking about our former state as being slaves to sin. Paul then gives the people that know the law an example about how to think about the concept of either being a slave to sin or a slave to righteousness. So does it follow that we abolish the Torah by this trusting? Heaven forbid. On the contrary, we confirm Torah. So you're not under law, but you're under grace, right? So what Paul's saying is, can we rely on grace alone and discard the Torah? And he says, absolutely not. Heaven forbid. That's not what we're going to do here. But on the other hand, on the contrary, we actually confirm Torah through this process. And it's because if you think about Abraham, again, this trusting in God and proving once and for all that we are guilty of mismanaging the knowledge of good and evil was the original intention of Torah. Because it says that the Torah was given so that everybody could be shut up under sin, right? Or shut up under disobedience. Basically to prove that none of us on our own can be obedient to him 100% of the time. That's what the purpose of Torah was. One of the purposes of Torah. But then also we had to trust in God with Torah because you had to trust in the atoning sacrifice, in specific on the day of atonement for the priest and also for the people. You still had to trust in innocent blood. Okay. Or do you not know, my brethren, for I am speaking to them that know the law, that the law has dominion over a man as long as he is alive, just as a woman by the law is bound to her husband as long as he is alive. But if her husband should die, she is freed from the law of her husband. And if while her husband is alive, she should adhere to another man, she would become an adulteress. But if her husband should die, she is freed from the law and would not be an adulteress, though joined to another man. And now, my brethren, you also have become dead to the law by the body of Messiah, that you might be joined to another, even to him that rose from the dead, which is Yeshua, and might yield fruits unto God. For while we were in the flesh, the emotions of sin, which are by the law, were active in our members, that we should bear fruits unto death. But now we are absolved from this law, and are dead to that which held us in its grasp, that we might henceforth serve in the newness of spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. And so what this basically gets to is how righteousness is obtained. Because like the Pharisees, it was said of the Pharisees, and we'll cover some of this here in a minute, they were seeking to establish their own righteousness through obedience to Torah, right? So that was what they were actively trying to do, is to establish their own righteousness through the Torah, instead of accepting the gift of being considered righteous by Yeshua, right? So since they couldn't see him for who he was, they can't accept the gift of being considered righteous by God. And so what they have to do then is seek to establish their own righteousness, because they don't have a righteousness that comes from God.
But my goodness, though, do we not see all the time of the mismanaging of the Torah?
For sure.
I mean, they're just wielding it like a sword they don't
I
even know how to hold.
Yeah. Well, so I had a dream one time, and in this dream there was this man holding an AK, right? And he was holding this weapon, and there was this big line of people that were in a checkout line at a grocery store, and the people that were in line, they had no idea that there was like that they could acquire food somewhere else. They just thought that they had to acquire the food from the grocery store, and then so there were all these. There was this man that was basically holding this whole system together because he wielded this weapon. They didn't dare raise any kind of a um, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, they didn't question it, right? And so what can happen is when you're raised in church, or maybe you're not raised in church, maybe you start studying your Bible a little bit, and then you sort of discover Torah. Well, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to turn to the subject matter experts. That's what everybody does, and that can be dangerous ground there, because if we're listening to the wrong person wield this thing incorrectly, it can actually do us a lot of harm, right?
It becomes sin.
Right. Yeah, I can.
You're literally trying to do something and you're literally sinning while you're thinking that you're doing.
I know. Because if you're not careful, you're like, okay, well, it says right here to do this, and it says right here not to do this. And if I do this or don't do that, then I can somehow work my way into a closer relationship with God.
It's just ignoring the Spirit, though.
It is.
You're superseding what already has come.
Yeah, you're going about it from the wrong direction. It's like
going upstream.
Yeah, trying to go to the right spot, but using a detour instead of the highway that's been laid down. Right.
That's what the Jews have done for
a
long time.
It is, because the only, since the temple is no longer with us, they're relying on their good works.
Because there's like, I don't know, they say like something like 1,000, lowercase l laws having to do with just like guarding the Sabbath.
Right. Yeah, they built fence laws around the fence to protect the fence from the fence that they're surrounded by. Yeah. It's a lot of fences.
You get further and further and further away from Yeshua.
Yeah. Well,
Going about
and
it that way.
they're completely out of touch with not even having him at all.
Yeah.
When you actually follow Orthodox Jews, the things that they have come up with is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And
it is, but
they're doing the rightest thing.
Yeah. But it's like
I could never understand.
I know.
Right. Or get close to keeping Torah.
Yeah.
It's like Darwin's theory, right? His theory of evolution, because he said, he said that if you don't believe in creation or this higher intelligence that obviously designed everything, if you don't believe in that, then this is really your only other solution, is to say that, our great grandfathers had a fist fight, and the other one said, I'm shedding my tail, and the other one said, I'm not shedding my tail. And then, you've got the monkeys, and then eventually us, right? So the monkeys are still in the trees with the tails. We're monkeys without tails. But Darwin himself said that this is not the way it is. But if you're going to go the route of not having God, or this awe-inspiring intelligence that's obviously greater than man, this is your only solution. And we can liken that to what, unfortunately, some in the Orthodox community have sort of done, which is to say that if you're not going to trust in Yeshua and his atonement, well, you have no temple, right? And so the only thing that you have to rely on is your own good works, your own righteousness, right? Which, devoid of the Spirit, you can be as righteous as possible. You can be a really good person, but God doesn't see you that way because you rejected his son. Sticky. Okay, so just as Yeshua fulfilled the commandments by living by the Spirit, we as his disciples are supposed to also. But there's only one way to do that, and it is by living by the Spirit that helps us in our inadequacy. And that means that the marriage, the relationship piece has to come first, because without the marriage and the relationship, then there can be no children or the new creation. And if there's no new creation, then we're hosed, because we have no ability to do the things that he wants us to do. We're powerless. We might get 70% of it right, or 50% of it right. Some might get 90% of it right. We can tithe all the cumin. We can tithe all this and that. But if we don't pay attention to the widows and the orphans, what good is it, right? It's what Yeshua was actually talking about. Okay, keep going. What shall we say then? Is the law sin? No. But Paul says, I wouldn't even know what it was except by means of the law. For if I had not known what coveting was, and had the law not said that you shouldn't covet, and by this commandment sin found occasion and perfected in me all covetousness, longing, which is a longing for what is forbidden. For without the law sin was dead, and I without the law was alive formerly. But when the commandment came, sin became alive, and I died, and the commandment of life was found to be death unto me. For sin, by the occasion which it found by means of the commandment, seduced me, and therefore slew me. Therefore the law is holy, and the commandment is holy, and righteous and good. So did that which is good therefore become death to me? Far be it. But sin, that it might be seen to be sin, perfected death in me by means of the good law, that sin might be more condemned by means of the commandment. Because we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal and sold to sin. So what he's basically outlining here is, when I was in my party phase, early in my teen years, I didn't even know what most of this stuff was, right? The alcohol and all of the other stuff, right? But once I saw it introduced, I was like, man, that's not for me, right? Like, and then when I found out that that's not what you're supposed to do, I was like, yeah, actually, that kind of is, I kind of like that, This is kind of the same idea that Paul is talking about, because if you don't tell your kids, hey, don't go jump on top of that car. If you don't tell them that, the odds of them jumping on top of the car is not very good. But if you tell them that and they think you're not looking, well, now they're like, ooh, maybe I can jump on top of this car and my parents not find out about it, right? It's a crude example, but that's kind of what Paul's talking about here. And so the law was given to prove to us that we are all criminals, essentially, because the commandment came, we realized what sin was, and it ignited the sin nature that was already in us, and it caused us to do the things that we knew that we shouldn't do, which is why Paul says, the things that I want to do, I don't, and the things that I don't want to do, that's what I do. And so I find this law at work, that it's not me really that is carrying out these acts, but it's the sin that actually lives in me. And how do we know what sin is? Well, we know what sin is because the law told us what sin was, right? So it's the very law ignited this sin nature which is in us, so that God could prove to all of us that we're criminals. Okay, the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, in the flesh, and a slave to sin. This is what Paul's saying. But then he goes on to say that trusting in God and his righteousness and not in our own righteousness, just like Abraham, and proving once and for all that we're guilty of mismanaging the knowledge of good and evil, was the original intention of Torah. Because it would be fine, right? If we all had the ability, we know what's good, we know what's bad. If we could just manage that properly, it'd be fine, right? But since we have both, it reveals this nature inside of us that tends to gravitate towards the thing that we're not supposed to do. So we're incapable of keeping the law in perfection because we have the knowledge of good and evil, and that's from the forbidden tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And he had to prove this to his people. So what Paul is saying is that we weren't able to identify the difference between good and evil until the commandments exposed our desire for evil. Oops. So his law exposes and isolates two things. First, it exposes our distrust. In the garden, did God really say? And then also the knowledge of the desire of evil, which leads to sin and death. Okay, we'll keep going. And I've added some notes in here, but I think it helps me. If it helps you, that's cool too. If not, just disregard. Sure. Yep.
So this is something I studied a while back, a few codes ago, and one thing that I learned out of this too, where it says, verse 8, and by this commandment sin found occasion. So there's other versions, like mine says, seizing opportunity through the commandments.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people kind of skip over that. But what it's actually saying, and the way I see it, I'll just tell you how I
Sure.
see it.
Yeah.
So, like in a war, if you really want to defeat the enemy or whoever you're fighting against, you try to take away their sources of life. So you try to poison their water or steal their, cut off their food
Supply routes,
chains.
yeah.
You know, you're trying to get them at the chokehold. You're trying to hit them where it hurts. So the way I read that is the opportunity. So mine says the opportunity through the seizing an opportunity through the commandment or sin finds an occasion. What it's doing is that evil is trying to hit you right there at the choke point, at the commandment itself. It's going all the way back to the root, and that's where the opportunity comes from. And then from there, in our lives, we have this, then you have this fork in the road. So you come into these situations where so if you're walking in the Spirit, you'll come into these situations and you know what the right thing to do is. But yet the sin side can either be like very attractive, or you're seeking self-will, or whatever it may be. You kind of have this decision to make. So I don't know. I was just trying to point out that that's what that means, is that it's like the opportunity begins right there, because the enemy wants to hit you right there, like at the very base, the very source, which is the commandment that's telling us the right thing to do. So he's going to go there, all the way there, to try to start from there to make you do the wrong thing.
Well, if the commandment brings life, it
Right.
would be
Yeah.
to steal your life.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to get at. I'm probably not explaining it in a very good way, but anyway.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good. I snorted. All right, we'll keep going here. Yes, very professional. Okay, so for we know that the law is spiritual, but I am of flesh, having the knowledge of evil, sold into bondage, sold into slavery, to sin, because of my disobedient nature that breaks Torah. For what I am doing, I do not understand. For what I am practicing, I am not practicing what I would like to do, which is being obedient to God. But I am doing the very thing that I hate, which is being disobedient to God by breaking Torah. But if I do the very thing that I do not want to do, which is being disobedient to God by breaking Torah, then I agree with the law, confessing that the law is good. Because the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, having my mind fixated on the things of the flesh. So now no longer am I the one doing it, but sin who dwells in me, which is the knowledge of evil, which arouses our fallen state and causes us to sin. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is, in my flesh, for the willing is present within me, but the doing of the good is not. For the good that I want to do, I don't do, but I practice the very evil that I do not want. But if I am doing the very thing that I do not want to do, then I am no longer the one doing it, but sin, which dwells within me. The cool thing is this is Paul, right? It would be different if it was Chris down the street, saying this. But what I always take solace in is if it's one of the apostles, that's a huge thing too. But when you take into consideration that this is Paul, who is an expert in the law, first and foremost, and then he's got this understanding that he is supposed to illuminate to the rest of the world, along with the apostles. But when you compare his writings with the rest of the apostles, it's tough not to say It's tough to say that he is not sort of the most preeminent apostle. So if he's saying that, if he's laying out what he's wrestling with, that gives me great comfort because I do too, right? Even walking in the Spirit, right? Even doing the things that I'm supposed to do behind the scenes for the relationship to be healthy. If I get out of that, I have a choice. If I get out of that and I start wandering into old man territory, well then anything goes, right? Not anything, but I mean the odds of me doing the thing that I don't want to do goes up dramatically, right?
The
And
seizing of the opportunity
that's it.
becomes even more
Yep.
attractive.
Yep.
Or easily like ignored.
Yep. And people do a lot of mental gymnastics and say that, well, Paul didn't sin. He couldn't possibly have sinned, so this isn't what he's saying. Well, but it clearly does say what he's saying, right? I mean, it'd be very difficult to make this say something that he's not saying. So,
Well, not one was righteous.
right,
So, there's people out there saying that Paul didn't sin.
yeah, mm-hmm, yeah, and he couldn't because he's an apostle, and apostles are infallible.
Well, that sounds Catholic to me.
Well, if you say it sounds Catholic, it's got to sound Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox too, because they came from the same branch of Catholicism. And if you say that sounds Catholic, then it really involves a large portion of the current modern church. Because they believe there's a lot of people believe that the popes or the continuation of the apostles' line was infallible. And you can even read that in early Christian writings. They say that the ecclesia was infallible too. Like the assembly was infallible because they were under the guise and direction of the Holy Spirit. And so therefore, God in protecting his word and protecting all the traditions and all of the things, saw over their perfect, to make sure that it was perfect. What they were doing was perfect,
We really took it seriously. They were free from sin.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, so, but this is exactly what the law was designed to do, which is to develop trust again with God, right? Because even though we could do 9 out of 10 times we're choosing the right thing, that 10th time where we don't, we have to make, there has to be atonement, right? So we're still trusting in that innocent blood to atone for our sin, right? The same way that our forefathers did. It still goes back to trusting in that innocent blood. Most of it was on a large portion of it was on the Day of Atonement when you had the offering for the priest and the offering for the people. That was where the atonement was codified. So it was to prove once and for all that we're all guilty of mismanaging this knowledge that we have, which is good and evil as a result of our former ancestor eating from or doing the thing that God told us not to do originally. Forefathers trusted in the atonement that came through the blood of an innocent offering. Covered that. The law was designed to isolate these two things, our distrust of God and the nature that desires sin, because we have the knowledge of good and evil. Keep going. I find, therefore, a law coinciding with my conscience, which agrees to my doing good. But evil is always near to me. For I rejoice in the law of God in the interior man, in the inner man, but I see another law in my members, which wars against the law of my conscience and makes me captive to the law of sin, which exists in my members also. O miserable man that I am, who will rescue me from this body of death? I thank God by means of our Lord Yeshua Messiah, Jesus Messiah, that I shall be rescued. Now, therefore, in my conscience, I am a servant of the law of God, but in my flesh, a servant of the law of sin. There is therefore no condemnation to them who in Messiah walk not after the flesh. For the law of the Spirit is life, which in Jesus has emancipated us from the law of sin and death. Inasmuch as the law was unfruitful because of the weakness of the flesh, God sent his Son in the likeness of sinful flesh on account of sin, that he might in his flesh condemn sin, so that the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us, since it is not in the flesh that we walk, but the Spirit. Because the new nature is not criminal. Laws are written for criminals. If there were no criminals, there would need not be any laws. So it's drawing this distinction here that we ought to pay attention to. Again, you see the same usage of the word emancipated. So Romans 5:17, Paul explains what grace actually is, which is the gift of being considered righteous in God's sight through the accepting of the atoning sacrifice of Yeshua, and this trusting in God directly, just as Abraham did. So how does the requirement of the law get fulfilled in us? It is because he, Yeshua, declares us innocent. He declares us righteous. He then gives us his Spirit, or his nature, which is said to be the helper, the Holy Spirit. And this is the building blocks of that new creation, a newness of heart, which is not a lawbreaker by nature. So then the fruit that is produced within us is the fruit of the Spirit, and there are no laws drafted against behavior that's pleasing to God. That is the building blocks, or sort of the nuts and bolts of really thematically what Paul's getting at here. Okay, continuing on, it says, "For they who are in the flesh set their mind on the things of the flesh, and they who are of the Spirit set their mind on the things of the Spirit." And I'll pause here for a second, but it really, when we were talking last time about focus, remember that? Talking about focus. I thought of you when I was going through this for this time, because that's what it's really getting at, is the focus, right? If we're focusing on the things of the flesh, well, guess what the fruit's going to be? Guess what the harvest is going to be? Set our minds on the things of the Spirit, well, guess what the fruit of the harvest of that is going to be? For setting the mind on the things of the flesh is death, but setting the mind on the things of the Spirit is life and peace. So our focus dictates whether we walk with God or not. And this is where cooperation with God is so important. I put that up there because of our conversation last time about how the focus really dictates, like whether we do well or whether we don't. Because setting our mind on the things of the flesh is enmity towards God. What that means is that it makes us an enemy of God if we set our minds on the things of the flesh. For it does not subject itself to the law of God, because it is not possible. And they who are in the flesh cannot please God. You, however, are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit. This is my note here. We're in the Spirit if our focus is on the things of the Spirit, which is where the secret place is, where the nature exchange takes place. If that marriage is working, then this new creation is produced when he exchanges our old nature for the new nature, which is his Spirit. If the Spirit of God truly dwells in you, and if anyone there is not the Spirit of Messiah, he is not of his, which essentially means if somebody does not have the Spirit of God, we are not his disciple to begin with. But if the Messiah is in you, the body is dead in regard to sin, and the Spirit is alive in regard to righteousness. And if the Spirit of him who raised our Lord Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised our Messiah from the dead will also give life to our dead bodies because of his Spirit that dwells in you. And if you think about it, like, that's what we're all looking forward to, right? In the end, at the end of the day, that's what we're all looking forward to is if he comes in our lifetime, great. We just are transformed in the twinkling of an eye, like Paul talks about. But if he doesn't, then we have to look forward to the resurrection, right? That's what we're all looking forward to. So I put here our focus dictates our lifestyle or our style of life. If we focus on the things of the flesh as a lifestyle, then the harvest will be the desire for more flesh. Um, Obviously, everybody knows this, but the problem with that is that it's never enough. Once you start engaging in it, it's just never enough. It's never enough. But if we focus on the things of the Spirit as a lifestyle, then the harvest will be the desire for more of the things of God. So being his disciple means that we are to give our attention or to be immersed, what we were talking about um, in the beginning, to immerse ourselves in the ways of our rabbi. Follow him, learn the way he lived his life, do what he instructs us, and have our focus on the things of God. When our focus is right, the product that is produced is the fruit of the Spirit, which leads to life. When we don't, the product is sin, which leads to death. And Paul is just simply acknowledging that he sees both at work within himself at the same time. He sees both of these things at work. On the one hand, uh, the old nature, which sins, which leads to death. On the other hand, the new nature, which doesn't need any laws, because that new nature is not a lawbreaker by nature. There's no laws drafted against good behavior. He's just simply saying that I see both of these at work simultaneously within myself. And I think if we're honest, that's what we see too, right? I mean, I know I do, right? On the one hand, I can have a great day. Everything goes good. It's all good. Everything's good. But then on the other hand, that old man can emerge. It's what some of the Jewish sages called. There's two different definitions. But one I'm referring to is where they talk about the evil eye, right? So you have two eyes. One is focused on the thing which is good. The other one is focused on the thing which is not good. I call that. Some of the sages called that the evil eye. I wouldn't even reference it, but it does kind of actually work, right? Because you have both things present within us, and wherever our focus is kind of determines how we do, right? So if we get out of practicing the marriage covenant and we try to do it on our own for a while, it ends up we end up in a disaster, right? You slowly start turning back into your old man. But on the contrary, the opposite is true too. The more we focus on the things of God, it's like there's no laws, because you're not even cognizant of your behavior, because there's no reason to really examine your behavior if you're doing what's right, right? Like if you're full of mercy, full of long suffering, full of love for your fellow man and your neighbor, and if you're doing all those things, well, you're not worried about if you're breaking any kind of commandment or not, because that nature doesn't break commandments. And so you got both inside, right? We have both of it inside of us at the same time, and we sort of weave in and out of that depending on where our focus is. I know I do.
Well, it's moment by moment. Every day you have to be focused
Yeah.
on that. Like me and Mackenzie were talking about that the other day, being mindful, walking into a new environment or just anything, always having the armor on.
Yeah.
When you go there, because you can so quickly, the anger comes on you, or anxiety, or whatever it is, that to steal your joy and get you in the flesh, and so it's just
Yep.
moment by moment.
Absolutely.
On the flip side of that, I feel like I probably have the propensity to feel like, man, look at me walking so good and full of mercy and woo, I'm doing great. And then like the pride,
Yeah.
on the other side is like, look at all this self-righteousness. Yeah. So it's like
Yep.
the ditch on both sides.
It is. It's funny because like you'll run into people that are they're celebrating Sukkot, or maybe it's Atonement. It doesn't matter what feast day it is, right? But they're there because they're supposed to be, right? They're there because that's what it says to do. But it's like they're tithing cumin but they're not paying attention to the weightier matter, which is the widow and the orphan. What I mean by that is they're there on the day, but they're not focused on that at all, man. I mean, they're dropping f-bombs and all the stuff. Which not it's not that the f-bomb is the ultimate deal breaker or something, but it does reveal something about what's going on in our heart, right? Because it's out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks, right? So if we're slandering and dropping this, just behaving in a way that is not suitable, if someone is his disciple, right? But they're there on the Day of Atonement, or they're there on Sukkot. I always make the case, it's like, what's the point? You know what I mean? Like, what's the point? Because we're kind of missing, we've got we have the automobile kinda, but there ain't no tires on it, right? There's no transmission in the car. Like, it's not going to go anywhere. And so I always make the case that if you feel like you should be celebrating a certain days because that's what it says, and it doesn't come from an honest desire from the new nature to celebrate those days, might as well just go home, because we're not really engaging in it. And actually, there's another part of scripture that Paul sort of, I think it's in Galatians. In fact, I know it is. Well, I think it is. But he says, "I fear for you because you observe days and months and years." The issue is not the days and months and years. The issue is the word right before, where it says observe. If you look that word up, what it means is that they are seeking to establish their own righteousness by observing those days.
Whenever I see focus too, you can take it a lot deeper. Like, for example, there'll be things where I can mentally focus on things, but here I'm not. You know what I mean? Like, I can get myself to be like, okay, I got to focus here, like, I got to get this done. But in my heart, the focus of my heart, or the way my heart sees it, is not the same.
Right.
And so, but that's where it comes from. And that's what's trying to be corrected, is the focus of your heart. So when you do mentally tie that to what you're doing, you literally, like, you actually love it and care it.
Yeah.
And it's right and it's real, and it is something of the Spirit rather than, I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. It comes from the, and it comes from the nature, the new nature, right? Because, like, if you think about work, there's a lot of days, man, where where I'm like, oh, my passion to be here is through the roof, Jackson. But most days it's like, man, I kind of don't want to be doing this right now, right? And so if you carry that over into the sort of the kingdom mentality, it's like, if our heart is not in it, then it's not really stemming from the new nature. It's really coming from a place of, we think that we have to do these things through rites and religious observances so that we'll be okay with God. Right?
That's when you, like, see, you hear people say all the time, like, oh, this person is fake, or they put on this facade because they want to be seen as being some certain type of person or whatever. But deep down, it's not that at all. They are a totally different person here than they are here. What they're trying to get you to see is sometimes not really who they are.
Right.
But isn't it like God? God is the one that's he's the final judge.
Absolutely.
So anyway, so even if they come with that spirit, like you said, on first,
Yeah.
he might, through that experience, they might experience and then go
Sure.
on from there.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, because I look back. Yes.
I know at some point I've done things. Like,
Yes.
well, I get what I was doing. What else is it?
Yeah.
I've learned from it, and well, I guess depending on what kind of part you come across.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just felt
Yeah, because if you,
I would say that it's hard. Again, Channing and I were talking about this this week. It's hard sometimes to discern, at least personally, between it being love, like you have this love in your heart or for others or circumstances, but then also just the obedience and it not being obligation, but again, that nature of like, what's right to do.
Yep.
And you're trying to train yourself almost because you want his nature
Mhm.
that is right to supersede that which is at war against it, and that to be written. And
It's like you're being
so-
obedient by faith.
Yeah.
And so it can be difficult sometimes, I think, as you walk that out.
For sure.
You don't really feel it.
Right.
You're doing it.
Yes.
But you're like,
So it is out of love,
Mhm.
which is ultimately the purpose in all of this, right? Is to express our love for him,
Yeah.
as he has expressed his love for us. But yeah, in the process, it's, I don't know. It can be
I know exactly what you mean.
But it's like,
self-condemning.
Yeah.
Or you're like, oh wait, am I doing this?
Yeah,
because
and-
I'm obligated, or am I doing this to earn something
Yep.
here?
And only God knows, because that's what he's an expert in examining, is the issues of the heart, right? Like that's what he actually looks at, is what the heart posture is. And like even Yeshua, there's certain passages in the new writings where it says that he knew what was in their hearts. And so therefore he was able to make determinations about what he was seeing, because he saw the issue behind the scenes, which is in the heart. So I don't
think we can see here by people's fruit. That's kind of seeing
yeah,
their true colors or whatever, but their
Right.
fruit kind of shows you where their
it does.
heart is, because they can be saying a lot of things, but you're like,
Hmm.
so the trick is like,
never
how do
seen
you,
that.
how do you keep on walking in love toward those people that are showing you their fruit, which is rotten?
Yeah,
Yeah.
We
that's
have a
hard.
family situation like that we're sort of walking through, and it's like, when we were really in prayer about it. How do you, like, Father, help us to show your love toward this person who is like really showing some rotten,
Yeah.
yucky stuff. And yeah, it's hard.
It is, because there was a time when that was me too, right? Like, I mean, I was,
Oh, for sure.
so if it wasn't for, somebody sort of extending that olive branch to me a long time ago, it was literally like God working through that person. But to do that, but what you're saying is like, how do you walk that out? Well, sometimes that's one of the, especially when it's family, man, that can be some of the hardest stuff to.
Especially when many olive branches have been
Yeah.
reached out.
Already.
Yeah. It's almost like you kind of reach a certain stage of the game where it's like, yeah, what I always say is, once a person shows you who they are, it's best just to believe them. Do what you can still, but don't overexert yourself. Right. Yeah. Because you can run into people sometimes that will be like a vampire to you. Right. It's always something else that they need, or it's always something, it can just get pretty crazy. There's always some sort of a problem. There's always there's always something else that they need your help to work through and walk through, and work and walk and walk and work and work and walk. And discipleship is great. But if you find yourself in a place where it's like, man, I am thoroughly exhausted here, and every time I turn around, it's like there's no reciprocal. It's nothing reciprocal. It's always just take and take and take. That's where it gets really difficult to do.
It's like being a neighbor.
Yeah, it gets really difficult.
And boundaries doesn't mean that you don't love them.
No.
That's
Mm-mm.
healthy to have boundaries.
Yep, for sure. Okay. Now we are debtors.
I'm sure all the kids are.
Oh, I thought you were okay. Now we are debtors, my brethren, not to the flesh, that we should walk according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the practices of the flesh, this lifestyle of sin, then you will live. For they who are led by the Spirit of God are the sons of God. For you have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption, by which we cry out, Abba, Father, or Father, our Father. And this Spirit bears witness to our spirit that we are the sons of God, or the offspring of God. And if we're sons, then we're heirs, heirs of God, and participators of the inheritance of Messiah, so that if we suffer with him, we will also be glorified with him. For I reckon the sufferings of this present time are not comparable with the glory that is to be developed in us. For the whole creation is hoping and waiting for the development of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to vanity, not by its own choice, but because of him who subjected it, in the hope that as also the creation itself would be emancipated from the bondage of corruption into the liberty of the glory of the sons of God. So the church in Rome was super heavily persecuted. Paul and Peter being the most notable martyrs. That's what he's referring to. Culturally and in that time period, that if we suffer with him, we shall also be glorified with him, because this church was so notably persecuted. It says that the creation was subjected to vanity, which means it was devoid of the truth and devoid of appropriate behavior that had become corrupt. And it had to be this way so that we would repent for the mishandling of the knowledge of good and evil. In Genesis 6, it says that the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great upon the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart, because the whole earth was corrupted before him. Okay, so it says, for we know that all the creatures are groaning and travailing in pain until this day. And not only they, but we also, in whom are the first fruits of the Spirit. We groan within ourselves and look anxiously for the adoptions of sons, or the redemption of our bodies. I'm going to pause here just to remember that the church that Paul is writing to, heavily persecuted, Paul and Peter being martyrs. So there are whole denominations out there that say this right here is one of the proof texts for praying in the Spirit, for praying in tongues. That's what they say, because it says that all the creatures are groaning and travailing in pain until this day, and not only they, but we also whom are the first fruits of the Spirit, we groan within ourselves and look anxiously for the adoption of sons. Then later on it says, but the Spirit prays for us with groans not expressible. Right? But if you consider that Paul is talking to a heavily persecuted church, the Church of Rome, Paul and Peter were martyred in Rome, what he's actually saying is he's talking about the persecution that they were currently experiencing. When he says, if we suffer with him, we will also be glorified with him. And also that when we see the creation in its current state, ourselves included, we look forward to the final redemption, the resurrection from the dead, having already received the first fruits of the Spirit, or the new nature, which is the redemption and glory that Yeshua received, he also being a type of first fruits unto God. But when we see the creation in its corruption, and also the conflict of ourselves, which is the battle of the two natures that Paul was just talking about, when this takes place, we groan within ourselves, and we enter into this agreement with God that we and the rest of creation have mishandled the knowledge of good and evil. And he himself prays for us, because we don't know what to do but groan and anxiously await the restoration that is coming, not only in and of ourselves, but when we see the world at large in its current state. It causes us to groan within ourselves. Who's our mediator? Who's our intercessor? It's Yeshua, right? And so that's actually what Paul is describing there. Okay. let's go on here. And we know that he aids them in all things for good who love God, them whom he predestined to be called. And he knew them previously, and he sealed them with the likeness of the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn of many brothers. And those whom he previously sealed, them he called. And those whom he called, them he justified. And those whom he justified, them he glorified.
I think a lot of people use verse 28, just the first part of it,
Mm-hmm.
and that all things are going to work out for good, but it's for those who love him.
Right.
There's a big difference there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. How do you guys feel about the predestination verbiage there?
100% Calvinist over
Are you? Okay. Well, if you do reference these passages, people will automatically try to shove you into that box, right? That's what they'll try to do. It's happened to me, remember? And but what does it say, right? This is what it says. We know that he aids them in all things for good who love God. Them, should be a comma there, but there's not. Them whom he predestined to be called. And he knew them previously. What does that mean? Maybe it's a little bit of before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew you. Right? There's no telling what we don't understand. And so I always say that we probably shouldn't take dogmatic positions about things that we don't understand. But also at the same time, don't let somebody shove you in one of these camps. Oh, well, if he thinks this way, he has to be, Calvinist, for example, or he has to be amillennial or whatever it is. I'm none of those things that I know of. I don't want to be labeled and categorized, right? I know nobody else does either. But that's what people that like to debate try to do, is they try to shove us into these positions. But what does it say? It says that he predestined us to be called, and he knew them previously. And he sealed them with the likeness of the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn of many brothers. And those whom he previously sealed, them he called. And those whom he called, them he justified. And those whom he justified, them he glorified. What then shall we say of these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Takes on a different connotation, right? You see this passage quoted all the time, but really what it's referring to is what we just read. What then shall we say of these things? If God is for us, who is against us? Who can be against us? And if he spared not his Son, but gave him up for us all, how shall we not give him all things? Or how shall he not give us all things with him? Speaking of an inheritance. Who will set himself up against the chosen of God? It is God who justifies. Who is it that condemns? Messiah died and arose, is on the right hand of God, and intercedes for us. What will sever me from the love of Messiah? Will it be affliction? Will it be distress? Will it be persecution? Will it be famine, nakedness, peril, or the sword? As it is written, for his sake we die daily, and we are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. Again, very heavily persecuted church. But in all things we are victorious by means of him who loved us. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature will be able to sever me from the love of God, which is in our Lord Jesus Messiah. So it gets back to the focus piece again. Paul has his focus set on the love of God, the fact that God loved us, and set this whole thing into motion. He makes the case that this love is unbreakable, and it was established long ago through God's sealing, calling, justifying, and also glorifying the servants of Messiah. Paul states that it was God who chose you, and that's echoing what Yeshua said too. He said, you didn't choose me, but I chose you, and I chose you that you should go and bear fruit and fruit that remains. Oh, I actually put it in there. Okay. John 15:16. Okay, so if we know that, if we actually take what it says, then what that should produce within us is a lot of humility, actually, because he sets the whole thing in motion. We do have a part to play. How large of a part to play is it's pretty much unknown, I think. I don't know how much of it is our part to play. I think there's definitely a cooperation that's going on, but regardless, he knew who was going to be his and who wasn't. Right. Continuing here, I say the truth of Messiah, do not misrepresent, and my conscience bears witness in the Holy Spirit that I have great sorrow, and even sadness of my heart is unceasing. For I have prayed that I myself might be accursed from Messiah for my brethren and my kinsmen in the flesh, who are sons of Israel, to whom belonged the adoption of sons and the glory and the covenants and the law and the administration and the promises and the fathers, and from among whom Messiah appeared in the flesh, who is God over all, to whom be praise and benediction forever and ever. So what Paul's saying is, he's like, look, man, I would separate myself from Messiah if I knew that my brothers would join themselves to Messiah. That's a provocative statement. Yeah, exactly. Not, however, that the word of God has actually failed, for all Israel are not Israel. Sorry. For all are not Israel who are of Israel. Neither are they all sons, because they are the offspring of Abraham, or children in the flesh. For it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, in Genesis 21. And that is, it is not the children of the flesh who are of the children of God, but it is the children of the promise that are accounted for the seeds, or for the seed. For the word of promise was this: at that time I will come, and Sarah shall have a son. Nor this only, but Rebekah also, when she had cohabitated with one man, our father Isaac, before her children were born, or had done good or evil, the choice of God was pre-declared, that it might stand, not of works, but of him who was called. It's another big statement. For it was said, the elder shall be servant to the younger, as it is written, Jacob I have loved, and Esau I have hated. So what shall we say then? Is there iniquity with God? Far be it. Behold, to Moses also he said, I will have pity on whom I will have pity, and I will be merciful to whom I will be merciful, in Exodus 33. Therefore, it is not of him who is willing, nor of him who runs, but it is the mercy of God. For in the scripture he said to Pharaoh, for this very purpose I have raised you up, that I might show my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. Exodus 9. Therefore he has mercy upon whom he pleases, and he also hardens whom he pleases. But perhaps you will say to me, then why does he still find fault? Or who has resisted his will? On the contrary, who are you, O man, that you would question God? Shall the potter's vessels say to the former of it, why have you made me like this? Does not the potter have dominion over his clay out of the same mass to make vessels, one for honor and another for dishonor? And if God, choosing to exhibit his wrath and to make his power known in abundance of long suffering, brought wrath upon the vessels of wrath which were made for destruction, and made his mercy flow forth upon the vessels of mercy which were prepared by God for glory, namely upon us who are called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles. You have to go through some hardcore mental gymnastics to make this not say what it's pretty clearly saying here. Hard time following it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Romans and yeah.
Okay. Well, I can maybe condense it for you. What Paul is saying, this is not what I'm saying, because I don't want to be thrown into some box that I don't belong in, right? But what Paul is saying is that a long time ago, God chose you and he appointed you, right? And that he knew who were his disciples a long time ago. And whom he foreknew, he sealed and chose. So if we know that, this is what Paul's saying, then what about the people that he knew would not be chosen? What about the people that did not choose him, right? That didn't choose Messiah? What would be their outcome? Well, Paul says that there are those that have, like Pharaoh, that were appointed so that he could be, so that God could show his strength through, and that he hardened his heart. And then he goes on to say that he hardens hearts whom he chooses, and he has mercy on those whom he chooses too. So then the natural progression there is, well, I mean, how could a person that doesn't choose him say, why have you made me like this? Right? Or how could Pharaoh say, why did I do this? Why did you make me like this? Because it literally says that the Lord hardened his heart, right? And so then the natural progression from there is that if what Paul is saying is that, I'll read it to you here. The potter's vessel, in other words, we are earthen vessels, we're clay vessels, right? Because we're made from the dust, clay. We're considered clay in the potter's wheel. So if a vessel is made for dishonor, which is what Paul is saying, and another vessel is made for honorable purposes, we shouldn't question God whether the vessel is of honorable purposes or whether the pots are made for destruction. And he said that the choice was made long ago. It's hard because
Especially if you have loved ones that
you're right. And what you want to do is you want to say, well, let's see what the experts say on either side of this, because because it really gets into the issue of free will, right? And how much free will does a person possess? And there's all kinds of fringes and there's all kinds of positions on either side of this thing. I tend to look at what Paul is saying and just say, yeah, you know what? I think Paul's right.
But how would you understand mercy? How would you understand grace? Again, just like having the Torah.
Yeah.
How do we understand these things if there weren't something like an opposite of, so to speak?
Exactly. How would you know what love is without hate? How would you know what?
I understand like the pride in us, kind of wants to question our maker.
Yep, for sure.
But
yeah, because that's what the serpent did in the garden, right? Did he really say?
Yeah.
Right. Questioning the maker, But you have to try really hard. And you could literally read for the next 15 years scholarly papers on just this passage and what their views of it are, right? And you probably come away more confused than you were when you started, truthfully. So what I tend to do is I just say, well, if it's good enough for Paul and this is what he's saying, hey, it's good enough for me too, man. I would, we tend to refer to the subject matter experts a lot, like, hey, what does this passage say? YouTube, what does Genesis 6 mean, right? And we tend to defer to them. Right. But we literally can go to the subject matter expert, which is Paul and his writings, and he pretty much lays it out pretty plain, I think. I think it's pretty plain, personally.
Well, and maybe it's the ones who question it so much who aren't maybe as open to accepting his mercy and his
right
the truth of those things, because it becomes a stumbling block where they're like,
for sure,
why would God be this way?
Mm-hmm.
But you have to understand his character.
Right, and we're about to go forward here, and Paul is basically he's going to give us another level about how to understand this. So it's still in the context of who is considered Israel, right? This whole passage here. So you have Abraham's physical offspring, which are the native-born Jews, right? Native-born Israel, or because he who becomes his children or child through trusting in the atonement of Yeshua, spiritual sons. So you have these two things at work here. Also, as he said in Hosea, I will call them my people who were not my people, and I will have pity on whom I previously did not have pity upon. For it shall be that in that place where they were not called my people, there they shall be called the children of the living God. And Isaiah proclaimed concerning the children of Israel, though the number of the children of Israel should be as the sand on the sea, a remnant of them will live. And he has finished and cut short the matter, and the Lord will do it on the earth. And according to what Isaiah had before said, if the Lord of hosts had not found had not favored us with a residue or a remnant, we would have been like Sodom, and we would have been like Gomorrah. So what should we say then? That the Gentiles who ran not after righteousness have found righteousness, even the righteousness which is by faith. But Israel, who ran after the law of righteousness, has not found the law of righteousness. And why? Because they sought it not by faith, but they sought it by the works of the law. In other words, they trusted in their own righteousness that can be acquired through the obedience of Torah, but didn't trust in the atonement offered by Messiah. And this is like first century. This gets to the crux of the matter. Israel who chose, or Israel who saw Yeshua for who he was, and Israel who didn't. For they stumbled at the stumbling stone, as it is written, behold, I lay in Zion a stumbling stone and a stone of offense, and he who believes in him shall not be ashamed. Boy, that's really cut off right there. Let's see if we can fix that, because it's pretty. Yeah, maybe not. Okay. My brethren, so this is him continuing. My brethren, the desire of my heart and my intercession with God for them is that they might have life. For I bear, it's okay. For I bear them witness that in them there is a zeal for God, but it is not according to knowledge. For they are zealous for the things of God, but not for God himself. For they know not the righteousness of God, but they seek to establish their own righteousness, and therefore they have not submitted themselves to the righteousness of God. So this is a critical piece here. What Paul is talking about is his countrymen that received Yeshua, and also his countrymen that did not receive Yeshua. And it was because the reason that they did not receive him is because they were trying to establish their own righteousness. For Messiah is the aim of the law unto everyone that believes in him. For Moses describes this righteousness which is by the law like this: whoever shall do these things shall live by them. But the righteousness that is by faith, or trusting in Messiah's work, says this: you shall not say in your heart, who will ascend to heaven to bring Messiah down, or who will descend to the abyss of the grave and bring Messiah up from the place of the dead. This is in Deuteronomy 30. But what does it say? It says the thing is near to your mouth and to your heart, and it is the word of faith which we proclaim. And if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and you shall believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, that you shall live. So in the time of Moses and thereafter, Israel was focused on the commandment, right? They were focused on the law. They were focused on the commandment. They focused on the righteousness required in the Torah, but they did not submit themselves to the righteousness of God, which is to be found in Yeshua. Paul is not saying to stop practicing what is contained in the Torah. What he is really saying is that real righteousness only comes from God, because he is the embodiment of righteousness. Paul is saying that trusting in Yeshua as Messiah and the atonement for sin proves that we are God's children, because only the Father can reveal this to us. Remember, in Matthew 16, there's a time there where when Yeshua is asking his disciples, he's like, hey, who do the crowd say that I am? And they're like, well, some say you're a prophet, some say you're this and that. He's like, okay, cool, but what about you? Who do you say that I am? And he says, well, you're the Messiah, you're the Christ. And he's like, Yeah. And only my Father can reveal this to you, right? Interesting. So when it comes to the Torah, do what is in the law from our heart. But Paul warns us that seeking to establish our own righteousness through Torah observance does not in any way solve the problem. In the days of Torah, everyone messed up, but still had to trust that the innocent blood of the atonement is what actually solved the problem. We're going to look at this example because what Paul is doing is he's replacing some of the verbiage from Deuteronomy 30, right? So in Deuteronomy 30, it says, "For this commandment which I command you today is not too difficult for you, nor is it out of reach. It is not in heaven that you should say, who will go up to us to heaven for us to get it and make us hear it, that we may observe it. Nor is it beyond the sea that you should say, who will cross the sea for us to get it for us and make us hear it, that we may observe it. But the word is very near to you. It's in your mouth. It's in your heart, that you may observe it. So observe it. So it's not in heaven, but it is very near. It's righteousness based on the law, still needed atonement regardless of the performance, regardless of the record of Torah observance, still needed atonement. The righteousness available through our keeping of the commandments still needed the righteousness that comes from God, which is trusting in innocent blood to atone for our sin, right? To make it all work. But in Romans 10, what he does is he says, for Moses writing that the man who practices the righteousness which is based on the law shall live by that righteousness. But the righteousness based on faith speaks as followed. Again, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven? That is to bring Yeshua down. So he's replacing commandment with Yeshua in his reference in Romans 10. Or who will descend into the abyss? That is to bring Yeshua up from the dead. But what does it say? It says the word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith, or trusting in the Messiah, which we are preaching. So what he's basically saying is, who's going to go get salvation for us? Because that's what Yeshua's name means. And the righteousness that God gives his people when they believe in him. It's not in heaven. It's not in the abyss. It's very near, just like in Deuteronomy 30. In Deuteronomy 30, it was spoken through the prophet Moses. It was given by God, but spoken through the prophet Moses. In Romans 10, it's given by God again, but spoken through the apostles. The righteousness attainable through our trusting in his atonement restores the covenant and allows us to be a good wife again and not a harlot. A good wife honors her husband because she loves him, right? It's what you were talking about previously. So it's just interesting when you compare these two verses, because Paul is obviously talking about Deuteronomy 30 because of the verbiage there. But what he's done is he's augmented Deuteronomy 30 and he's placed something else in there that takes in other words, the seat has been superseded. So it's not that the law or the commandment is somehow not good, but it's just that he is preeminent over all things, including his own law, right? It's interesting. This is Paul speaking. This is not me speaking. It's Paul. And it's just interesting. So I figured we'd take a look at that. And you could go back and you could read all this backstory in Deuteronomy 30 if you want and do all the comparison, but I think we'll probably try to finish up here. Okay, continuing in Romans 10, if you shall confess with your mouth and shall believe with your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you shall live. For the heart that believes in him is justified, and the mouth that confesses him is restored to life. For the scripture says that everyone that believes in him shall not be ashamed. And in this, there is no distinction made between Jews or Gentiles. For there is one Lord over them all, who is rich towards everyone that calls upon him. For everyone that shall call upon the name of the Lord will have life. So what Paul's talking about here is the process of salvation. What he doesn't say here, but he does in the rest of his epistles, is that the proof of the Spirit is this new way of life that obeys God by nature. This new nature, a new heart, it empowers us to walk in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Whereas previously the commandments' job was to reveal that we were sinners by nature and that we still needed atonement. We still needed innocent blood for atonement. But now, after having received the new nature, if we keep our eyes focused on the giver of the new nature through intimacy, through that covenantal relationship, like a wife does, then the fruit of that relationship will be a newness of life, and a life that pleases God because he replaces our old nature, which naturally breaks the commandments, with his new nature, which does not break commandments, but is obedient by nature. Again, laws are written to criminals. There's no laws written against bad behavior. Okay, how then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? Or how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? Or how shall they hear without a preacher? Or how shall they preach if they are not sent forth? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of the heralds of peace and of the heralds of good things. Yours might say, how beautiful are the feet of those that bring good news. But all of them have not obeyed the proclamation of the gospel. For Isaiah said, my Lord, who has believed our proclamation? Therefore, faith is from the hearing of the ear, and the hearing of the ear is from the word of God. But I say, have they not heard? Surely they have heard, because their proclamation has gone out into all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. But I say, did not Israel know? First, Moses said this, I will awaken your jealousy by a people which is not yet a nation, and by a disobedient people I will provoke you. And Isaiah was bold and said, I was seen by those who didn't look for me, and I was found by those who didn't inquire of me. But to Israel he said, all the day long I have stretched out my hands to a contentious and disobedient people. But I say, has God cast off his people? Far be it. For I also, it's Paul speaking, for I also am of Israel, a descendant of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected his people whom he before knew. Yikes. Do you not know what he said to Elijah when he pleads against Israel in the scripture? When Elijah had complained to God against Israel and said, my Lord, they have killed your prophets and thrown down your altars, and I am left alone, and they seek my life. And it was said to him by revelation, behold, I have still reserved yet for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed their knees and have not worshipped Baal. So also at the present time, a remnant is also preserved by the election of grace. But if by grace, it is not of works. Otherwise, grace is not grace. And if it's by works, then it is not by grace. Otherwise, work is not work. What then? How do we reconcile this? Israel did not obtain that which it sought, but the election obtained it. And the rest of them were blinded in their heart. As it is written, God gave them a stupid spirit. It sounds really rude, right? The way that's written, but spirit of stupor, that's a little bit more kind, yeah. And eyes to see not, and ears to hear not, until this very day. And again, David said, let their table become a snare before them, and let their recompense be a stumbling block. Let their eyes be darkened, that they see not, and let their back at all times be bowed down. But I say, have they so stumbled as to fall entirely? Far from it. Rather, by their stumbling, life has come to the Gentiles to awaken their jealousy. And if their stumbling was riches to the world, and their condemnation riches to the Gentiles, how much more their completeness? So when we think about remnant, what it really means, it's a remainder, a number of people who've not bound their knee to the culture. It's because of grace, right? What is grace? It's the gift of being considered righteous in God's sight. The only way that it's acquired, though, is through the revelation of the atoning sacrifice of Yeshua. And we don't get to choose whether or not we see that, because we didn't choose him, but he chose us, and only the Father can reveal to us who Yeshua is. Crazy, right? But it is to you Gentiles that I am speaking. As I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I honor my ministry. If perhaps I may provoke jealousy in the children of my flesh, which is the natural citizens of Israel, and may bring salvation to some of them. For if the rejection of them was a reconciliation of the world, what will their conversion be but also life from the dead? For if the first fruits are holy, then the mass is also. And if the root is holy, then also the branches. And if some of those branches were cut off, and you, being a wild branch, were grafted into their place, and you have become a participator of the root and the fatness of the olive tree, do not be arrogant towards the natural branches, which is Israel. For if you are arrogant towards them, remember that you didn't sustain the root, but the root sustains you. You will say then, the branches were cut off that I might be grafted into their place, which is very true. They were cut off, but they were cut off because of their unbelief in Messiah. In other words, they missed their time of visitation. But you remain only because of your faith. So do not be conceited or puffed up, but rather have fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, perhaps he will not spare you either. Behold now the goodness and the severity of God. On them who fell, which is a large portion of Israel, severity, but on you kindness, if you continue in that kindness. But if you do not, you will also be cut off. And if they do not continue in their unbelief, even they will be grafted back in, for God is able to graft them back in again. For if you were plucked from the wild olive tree, which was natural to you, and were grafted in, contrary to your nature, into a good olive tree, how much more they be grafted back into their natural olive tree? And that you, my brethren, may not be wise in your own sight, I wish you to know this mystery, that blindness of heart, or the hardness of heart, has in some measure happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles shall come in. And then all of Israel will receive salvation. For as it is written, a deliverer will come from Zion and will remove all the ungodliness from Jacob. And then they will have the covenant that proceeds from me, when I shall forgive them for their sins. Now in the gospel, which is current, present time, they are enemies for your sake. But in God's perspective, when I say current time, I mean when this was written, right? And also today. Now in the gospel, they are enemies for your sake, but in God's perspective, they are beloved for the sake of the fathers, for Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc. For God is not changeable in his free gift and in his calling. For as you two were formerly disobedient to God, and have now obtained mercy because of their disobedience, so also are they now disobedient to the mercy which is upon you, that there may be mercy on them likewise. For God has shut all men up in disobedience, that he might have mercy upon all men. So how did he shut up everybody under disobedience? It's through the law, right? Because the law's purpose was to prove that we're all criminals. Oh, the depths of the riches of both the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and unfathomable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who became his counselor, or who has first given to him that he might be paid back to him again? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. So it's very easy to twist this stuff up. You know, if you just sort of casually walk through this, it is really easy to get some wild ideas on this side or the other. You know, and Paul or in Peter, it warns us against that. It's like, hey, some of the stuff that Paul's going to talk about is pretty difficult to understand, and those that don't understand it are going to probably twist it, right? And they're going to try to make it say things that it doesn't say. So in effect, they're saying, listen, you're really going to have to pay attention when you read Paul's writings, because He's brilliant. He has a deep understanding, and he's going to talk about some things that will probably be hard to understand for the casual, for the average person. You know, it is, man. So, anyways, anybody have anything else? We made it. I don't know what time it is. Did we do okay?
10 o'clock.
It's late time.
How long was